You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories this hour. And hundreds of people have been killed in an attack on the Al Ali Al Arabi hospital in Gaza, with both sides blaming the other for the atrocity. Breaking news in just the last few minutes. The leaders of both Jordan and Palestine have pulled out a proposed summit with the US President Joe Biden, who is due to arrive in Israel in the morning. Well, currently, Air Force One is sitting on the tarmac. As mentioned, those hundreds of deaths at a hospital in Gaza have complicated one of the most complicated situations that I've ever had to report on. It is uncertain just yet as to what exactly Joe Biden will be doing. He will, in fact, it looks like he may well be arriving just now. As we look at these pictures, indeed, yeah, that is the convoy heading straight for Air Force One. So the plane will be wheels up at some point today. Joe Biden will be, we assume, heading to Israel. But that trip to Jordan, it appears, won't now be happening. Let's speak to our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, joining us from Washington. I mean, Martha, you were saying this earlier whilst talking to Anna Jones, that it feels like a horrible, horrible thing to have to say. But what has happened at that hospital in Gaza has cast an almighty pall over the diplomatic efforts which Joe Biden wished to insert himself right into the middle of, the efforts that people would be hoping would be leading to a reduction in the violence, if not a complete cessation. Yeah, it's crass to say, Neil, but this timing couldn't be worse for President Biden. The complexion of this trip to Israel and the Middle East has completely shifted in the past 3 hours since that blast at the hospital in Gaza. We can see here the motorcade arriving at Joint Base Andrews, I believe, carrying President Biden. He left the White House here where I am around 20 minutes ago, so just a short journey there. But even in the space of that journey, this trip has shifted even more. He was expecting tomorrow to fly in to Tel Aviv to meet, first of all, with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. He was then expecting, up until about 20 minutes ago, to travel from Tel Aviv to Amman in Jordan to a summit to be hosted by King Abdullah of Jordan, which would be attended by the Egyptian President El-Sisi and also the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Well, a few hours ago, Mahmoud Abbas said, no, I won't be there. I want no part of it. In the past few minutes, we're hearing that summit in Jordan has now been completely cancelled. So one half of President Biden's trip to Israel and the Middle East no longer exists. And it was a very, very important half of his trip because it was there that he was going to appeal to those leaders to try and get behind Israel, as the US has, to try and get them to commit their full support to Israel, and also to try and stave off a widening of this conflict, to try and prevent this conflict from mushrooming further, which of course is the very real fear that groups like Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon will get involved, which will make this an altogether even more serious situation. He now won't get the ability to do that in person. He won't have that meeting with those three senior leaders in the region. That won't be happening now. So there'll be some major recalibration happening with President Biden and his closest aides as he prepares to get onto that Air Force One plane bound for Tel Aviv. Very much indeed. Well, we're going to stay with these pictures, of course. Joe Biden expected to leave very, very shortly, but still with us in the studio, and we hope we'll fully be turning our attention to the papers in just a second. The broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. This indeed there is Joe Biden approaching the plane. I mean, Ali, this makes the trip that President Biden had wished to take that much more complicated. And goodness, even in our discussion, we haven't yet got on to the rather tricky, the rather thorny issue of actually who was responsible for this. Well, I mean, it could not be worse timing for Joe Biden, who was going into a diplomatic storm in any case. It's absolutely horrendous what's happened this evening with this hospital being targeted. Now, Israel has denied it's them. You hear the Palestinian side saying it is definitely Israel. And Israel is saying it's Islamic Jihad, or it could be a misfired rocket from Hamas.
irrespective of who is to blame for this, there are innocent civilians who are dying here. The UN is saying that this is the worst humanitarian catastrophe in its 50 years since it's been in Gaza. There's a blockade going on. There are people even dying in the south in attacks as well. And the danger here for Israel is that there was a huge understandable amount of sympathy for Israel following that horrendous attack last Saturday, a week ago. 1,400 people butchered, murdered brutally. And everyone understands that Israel has a right to defend itself, but the manner in which it prosecutes that defense is really important, because the dominant power, in this case Israel, can do a lot more harm to its own cause than the terrorist Hamas can do to Israel. That is the danger for Israel.
I mean, Sonia, perhaps part of the reason for this, the cancellation of the summit in Jordan, just reading through the wires now, the UN envoy for Palestine, standing alongside other Arab envoys, say that they are outraged by, in quotes, the massacre that has taken place at the Al Ali hospital, and that the finger of blame is very definitely, from his perspective at least, and being pointed in the direction of the Israelis. I mean, it seems unlikely to me we're going to get a definitive answer on this anytime soon. And absent a definitive answer, both sides are going to continue going the way that they have been for the past week.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think what's happened at that hospital tonight, it's absolutely dreadful. So reports are of up to 500 people dead. One of the things we know about hospitals in Gaza is not only, are they home to the sick who couldn't move after that evacuation order from Israel, but it's also where civilians who couldn't move go to shelter. So there would have been lots of women and children outside. So, I mean, it's a sort of unthinkable number of tragedies. But, yeah, it's very hard to know, isn't it, following the story tonight, who actually is responsible, with both sides blaming each other. I think what is certain, though, is, well, whoever did it, it obviously is in breach of international law. You're not allowed to target humanitarian sites like hospitals like this. I think everyone's very clear on that. But also the timing of it. President Biden was coming to Israel. He's meeting with Netanyahu. Then there was supposed to be this summit in Jordan. Top of President Biden's mind will be two things. First of all, trying to urge caution with Israel in order to sort of minimise that humanitarian catastrophe that Ali's just been talking about, but also really trying to avoid further escalation. Is ridiculous that may sound, given how escalated it is already, but trying to keep, for example, Iran out of this conflict, Hezbollah. So, I think it's very bad news, because it's going to make those conversations that Biden wanted to have that much harder.
Absolutely.
Still, at every point in this conflict, we have had representatives of Israel Defence Forces saying there are going to be civilian casualties as a result of this. This evening, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, the international spokesman for the IDF, told CNN, "We did not strike that hospital. We do not intentionally strike any sensitive facilities, and definitely not hospitals. We are very much aware of the presence of civilians." And I suppose that it doesn't matter which side you put yourself on. I find it personally difficult to square that circle. The IDF saying there are going to be civilian casualties, and then at the same time suggesting that, do you know what, we don't target civilian facilities. And we have seen housing blocks coming.
But this is a war.
Yeah.
Wars are brutal, and innocent people get killed. And people were killed in Israel. Now innocent Palestinian civilians are being killed who have nothing to do with Hamas at all. Hamas is actually using them as human shields. And the reality is that Israel is going to have to go in on the ground, because there are tunnels, there's a network of tunnels, the most extensive probably in the world, that they have to deal with. And they're also now facing a diplomatic crisis. This whole thing that Sonia just talked about, the summit in Amman has been called off. You've had Mahmoud Abbas walking out of this. You've got demonstrations now happening in the West Bank. You've also got demonstrations happening even in Amman. You've also got Hezbollah having skirmishes with Israel on the northern border, and Iran saber-rattling around this. This is a very, very dangerous situation we are in. And we need to try and calm tempers. And Israel also needs to think about this. The manner in which it prosecutes its war is very important, and also it needs to think about what comes after decapitating Hamas in terms of political settlement. Let's not forget, in Afghanistan, within 2 months, when the Twin Towers came down, the Taliban had been toppled, and 20 years later they're back in power. So you need to think about, as part of decapitation strategy, what comes next.
We just see that Air Force One is moving, but actually, that will probably take more than a couple of minutes to get up into the air. So what I want to do, because this story is everywhere, and personally, it does feel that this may well be a turning point.
Yes.
Let's just quickly run through the front pages that we have. And we start with the FT. It, of course, leading with what they say is an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza, reported to have killed hundreds of people. We do not have that confirmed. The attack also the lead for the eye, but instead what they do is they report Israel's denial that the strike was their doing. The Palestinian president, of course, having already declared 3 days of national mourning. The Guardian, and this is the one that I think got me this evening, leading with one of the many harrowing images from the aftermath of the attack. It also adds that Israeli intelligence claims the blast was the result of a failed Hamas rocket launch. The Mail also leading on the attack, which, if the figures are correct, is now the single biggest loss of life in the conflict. Here's the Express. And guess what's on that front page? Yeah, as you'll see in just a second. Yeah, hundreds die at that Gaza hospital. Meanwhile, the Telegraph pointing out that the president's visit to Israel may now come at the most dangerous point of the conflict. Rishi Sunak also set to land in the region later this week. And here is also the Metro. It's echoing the words of a mother whose 21-year-old daughter was taken hostage by Hamas. The headline there, "Bring my baby home." And the Sun reacts to the death of a 13-year-old British girl who's now been confirmed to have died following a Hamas attack in southern Israel. Just a reminder, you can scan the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme and check out the front pages whilst watching us. We'll just continue to keep an eye on what is happening, guys, at Andrews Joint Base, I should say, these days. But whatever results from this, it just feels, and we've seen demonstrations across the region, which will continue no matter what the result of the IDF investigation is. We have seen leaders in the region making clear that this is not the point for jaw, which is scary enough. I mean, what's your view, Sonia? I mean, it does feel that this could really, really cause things to spiral even further out of control very, very quickly.
I think that's right, and I think that's what everybody's so worried about in the region, but also looking, on the outside into the region, which is that it really feels like we're at the brink of a further escalation here that could draw in other states, like Iran, for example. I think if Iran got involved, that would be dreadful news, because you've got the US talking about potential strikes if Iran were to get drawn in. So it could be a big further escalation of this conflict. And I think, hindsight is a fine thing, isn't it? But, there are lots of people saying that actually what's unfolded in the Middle East, over the last kind of 10 days or so, isn't that big a surprise to sort of close watchers and close analysts, and that actually, you've seen a real hardening of leaderships on both sides of this conflict. You've got the far-right government of Benjamin Netanyahu. You've got, Hamas, a terrorist organisation, controlling Gaza. But the West sides have sort of been turned away, and you haven't seen the kind of leadership from the US on this that you might expect. And actually, there were people who said that this was sort of a conflict zone that was waiting to blow up. So it's good that people are focused on this now. It's good that this is clearly at the top of Biden's to-do list. But, I think there'll be a lot of people who say, well, this is too little, too late.
I think that's a really interesting point that Sonia raised there about the fact that the US took its eye off the ball on the Middle East. Now,
100%.
Clearly the pivot has been to focus on the Asia-Pacific, particularly the threat from China. And what's happening at the moment today, there's a Belt and Road Forum going on with President Xi and Vladimir Putin meeting. So that's been their focus. You can't ignore the Middle East. And this has come back and smacked everyone in the face.
So what hope then, Ali, of...
Well, it's good that Biden's...
The reason I say that, we've been hearing again from the Foreign Secretary, as you would assume at a time like this, the destruction of the Al-Ali Hospital is a devastating loss of human life. But perhaps even the more interesting bit, the UK will work with our allies to find out what has happened and protect innocent civilians in Gaza. I mean, if people are not going to listen to Israel on this, are they going to listen to the Americans? Are they going to listen to us?
There could be an investigation, but the people on the ground will have already made up their minds. You can tell whatever narrative you want, and it may be the Israelis were not involved in this at all, but it will make a blind bit of difference to the people on the ground who are caught up in a war and innocent civilians are dying. So the reality is that Biden has to go there now, and he has to go and have a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, but he's not going to be speaking to the Arab leaders in the region. And there's also another problem here, which is there's a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding here,
100.
where Egypt will not open its borders. Understandably, it does not want to have militants on its own soil, nor will Jordan. And Jordan came out, I mean, King Abdullah was in Germany saying we are not going to have any refugees in our country.
The latest that we are just hearing is the White House has just confirmed that after consulting with the King of Jordan, the President will not be making that visit to Jordan itself, as you might expect. And, you know, the one thing that none of us have mentioned so far in this, and you can understand why there has been the focus in the hospital. And again, that Guardian front page, which we will bring up in just a second once Joe Biden actually takes off, sums up the problem here. You know, non-combatants, kids are being killed. But what of the 200 Israelis that remain in Hamas?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
And that is, and who must now be in more danger.
And on a couple of the front pages, you know, and I think it's really important that we see photographs of what's going on in Gaza. But a couple of the front pages have also got pictures of there were British Israeli hostages, and we know there was a 13-year-old teenage girl who is now confirmed to be dead. Her 16-year-old sister is missing, presumed to be a hostage of Hamas. So it's really, Israel is still counting its dead from that brutal, barbaric terrorist attack that we saw last Saturday, and and this is the issue. So absolutely everything has to be done within humanitarian international law when it comes to war. But I think the real difficulty about this for everyone is that. You need to... Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, but we have had, as we often get when wheels are up, a statement from the White House. White House officials saying this, after consulting with King Abdullah of Jordan and in light of the days of mourning announced by President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, President Biden will postpone his travel to Jordan and the planned meeting with these two leaders and President Sisi of Egypt. The President sent his deepest condolences for the innocent lives lost in the hospital explosion in Gaza and wished a speedy recovery to the wounded. He looks forward to consulting in person with these leaders soon and agreed to remain regularly and directly engaged with each of them over the coming days. Ali, Sonia, we will have to just pause there. We will have much more, of course, on this story. But first, we're just going to have a very quick look at the weather.